They gave him a violin to humiliate him, but when he played the first note, the entire school froze. Nothing was ever the same again. Malik Johnson was not the kind of student who liked attention. He preferred to stay quiet, sit in the back of the class, and do his work. He wasn't just focused. At 15 years old, he already knew what he loved: music. But not the music everyone at his school listened to. Malik didn't care much about rap or pop. He was in love with the sound of the violin. He had never told anyone at school about his passion because he didn't think they would understand. His classmates didn't even know he played an instrument. At Jefferson High School, being different usually meant being picked on or ignored. Malik was used to that. Malik's single quotes his love for the violin started when he was just 6 years old. His grandfather, Earl, had once been a jazz violinist. Earl had long fingers, a smooth voice, and a calm way of explaining things. He would play songs in the evening while Malik sat on the floor, watching him in awe. One day, Earl gave Malik a small violin. It was old, with scratches and worn-out strings, but to Malik, it was the most beautiful gift in the world. Earl began teaching him, and every day after school, Malik would go to his grandfather's house to practice. It became their daily routine. Malik grew better with time. At first, he made squeaky, uneven sounds, but slowly, with patience and practice, his fingers began to move smoothly. He could now play difficult classical pieces with emotion and skill. Still, he kept it all to himself. No one at school knew he was a violinist. Malik believed that if they did find out, they would laugh. People had already made assumptions about him, about how he looked, how he dressed, where he came from. He didn't want to give them another reason to mock him. Jefferson High was a mostly white school in a quiet town. Malik had moved there 2 years ago with his mother after she got a new job. Being one of the only black students made Malik feel like he didn't fit in. He heard whispers, saw the stares, and even caught jokes being made behind his back. Teachers didn't say anything openly, but sometimes Malik felt like they expected less from him. He wasn't angry, just tired. He had learned to keep his head down and keep moving forward. Then came Spirit Week. Every year, the school held a week of games, costumes, and assemblies to boost school spirit. Malik didn't usually take part in any of it. He didn't like crowds, and the loud events made him uncomfortable. But that year, something different happened. On the last day of Spirit Week, the school planned a Hidden Talents Assembly. It was supposed to be fun. Random students would be picked to come on stage and show a talent. Most people thought it would just be jokes, silly dances, or bad singing. No one expected anything serious. The auditorium was full. Hundreds of students packed into the seats, talking, laughing, throwing popcorn. Teachers stood along the walls, chatting with each other. On stage stood the school principal, Mr. Darrington, tall man with a loud voice and a big fake smile. He loved being the center of attention. With a microphone in hand, he started calling random students to the stage. First, a boy named Tyler did some breakdancing. People cheered and laughed. Then a girl tried to juggle tennis balls and drop them all. The crowd roared with laughter. It was all fun and games. Then Mr. Darrington reached into the box of student names and pulled out another slip. "Oh, we've got Malik Johnson," he said loudly. Malik froze in his seat. People turned to look at him. Some snickered. He felt his heart race. Didn't want to go up. He didn't sign up for this. But before he could say anything, Mr. Darrington grinned and said, "Come on up, Malik. See what kind of talent you've got." Reluctantly, Malik stood up and walked to the stage. He felt all the eyes on him. Some students whispered. A few rolled their eyes. He could feel their judgment. He stood on stage awkwardly, unsure of what to do. Mr. Darrington looked at him with a smirk and said into the microphone, "I think I've got something perfect for you." He turned to the side of the stage and called someone from the music department. A teacher appeared with an old violin, the same one used in music class, dusty and barely tuned. Mr. Darrington handed it to Malik and said, almost mockingly, "Why don't you play us a little Mozart?" The crowd laughed. It was meant as a joke. Mr. Darrington clearly didn't think Malik could play. Maybe he thought Malik would fumble and the students would laugh again. Maybe he thought the idea of a black student playing classical violin was so unusual it had to be funny. Either way, it wasn't a kind moment. It was a moment designed to embarrass Malik. Malik held the violin in his hands. For a second, he wanted to just walk off the stage. But then he looked out at the crowd. He saw the smirks, the phones recording, the teachers smiling awkwardly, and something inside him shifted. He had nothing to prove to them, but maybe it was time they knew who he really was. He took a deep breath and checked the strings. They were a little off, but he quickly adjusted them. His fingers moved with experience. The music teacher's eyes widened in surprise she hadn't expected Malik to know how to even hold the instrument properly. The room began to quiet down. People noticed the change in his posture. Malik tucked the violin under his chin, held the bow firmly, and closed his eyes. He remembered everything his grandfather had taught him. Every evening they spent together, every mistake, every correction. Every moment he had doubted himself, pushed all that into his fingers and began to play. No one expected what came next. The first note was clear, rich, and powerful. It echoed through the auditorium like a bell. The laughter stopped. The room grew still. Alexpo moved gracefully, drawing out a melody that was both beautiful and haunting. It wasn't Mozart. It was something deeper. Chardas by Monty. A fiery and emotional piece that demanded skill and soul. And Malik had both. His fingers flew across the strings fast and smooth. His bow danced, his body swayed. The music rose and fell like a wave of emotion washing over everyone. Malik wasn't just playing notes, he was telling a story. A story of struggle, passion, and pride. He poured everything into the performance. The audience was frozen. Some students sat with wide eyes, stunned. Others forgot to record. They were too busy watching. The teachers looked at each other in disbelief. Even Mr. Darrington stood motionless, his fake smile gone. Malik kept playing. His eyes stayed closed. In that moment, he didn't care about the crowd, or the jokes, or the stares. He was free. The stage, the violin, the music, that was his world. And he had just invited everyone into it. When the final note rang out, Malik held it for a second, then gently lowered the violin. The silence that followed was deep. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the clapping started. One teacher stood up and clapped. Then another. And then the students. One by one, they stood, clapping louder and louder. It became a roar of applause, a standing ovation. Malik looked up and saw the crowd rising to their feet. Phones were still out, now recording the cheers. He had stunned them all, not with anger, not with words, but with music. And the joke was no longer funny. Mr. Darrington tried to speak into the microphone but stumbled. That was, unexpected. Wow, let's give another round of applause for Malik. But his voice was lost in the sound of the cheering crowd. Malik stepped off the stage, calm and proud. He walked back to his seat, the violin still in his hand. For the first time since coming to Jefferson High, he felt seen not as a stereotype, not as a joke, but as himself. And this was only the beginning. Malik stood there on the stage with the violin in his hand. He could still hear the sound of people laughing in his ears, even though the room had gone quiet. He wasn't nervous anymore. Something inside him had shifted. Just a few minutes ago, he had felt embarrassed, like everyone was expecting him to make a fool of himself. But now, something else was in his heart. Something stronger, calm determination. He looked at the violin. It was dusty and old, and it didn't feel as comfortable as the one he used with his grandfather, but it would do. He knew how to bring this piece of wood to life. He had done it 1,000 times before, just never in front of a crowd like this. The students in the auditorium sat quietly, not knowing what to expect. Many of them were still thinking this was going to be funny. Maybe Malik would play a weird note. Maybe he would try something silly. Some had their phones out, ready to catch the moment and upload it online. A few students even had fake smiles on their faces, waiting to laugh. But there was something different about Malik now, the way he stood, the way he handled the instrument. His shoulders were relaxed, his eyes focused. Even some of the teachers began to notice. The music teacher, Ms. Harris, leaned forward slightly. She had taught violin for years, and could tell that Malik wasn't just pretending to know how to play. Malik placed the violin gently on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and took a slow, deep breath. He was not going to play something simple. He wasn't going to give them a small performance to fill time. No, he was going to show them who he really was. What they had laughed at, what they had dismissed, was about to become unforgettable. He remembered his grandfather's voice, warm and encouraging. Play with your heart, Malik. Don't play just the notes. Tell a story. Make them feel it. He lifted the bow and started playing. The first note came out smooth and deep. It rang through the auditorium like a whisper that suddenly makes everyone listen. The students who had been ready to laugh stopped. The ones who were whispering to each other fell silent. The teachers, even the ones who were just supervising, turned their full attention toward the stage. The melody started softly, like someone gently waking from a dream. Malik's fingers moved with ease, gliding along the strings. The sound was rich, emotional, and clear. He had chosen Chardas, a powerful and dramatic piece known for its speed, passion, and sudden changes in mood. It wasn't a piece for beginners. It was complex and required real skill to pull off. Malik had played Chardos hundreds of times in his grandfather's living room, but never like this. This time, he wasn't just playing for himself or for his grandfather. He was playing for everyone who had ever looked at him and thought he was less. He was playing for every time someone ignored him in class. Every time someone looked surprised when he answered a difficult question correctly. Every time someone assumed he didn't belong. His bow danced across the strings, shifting from soft, emotional melodies too fast, intense runs that made his fingers blur. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Even the students in the back, who usually paid no attention, were sitting up, watching in complete silence. The sound of the violin filled every corner of the room, bouncing off the walls, wrapping around the people in their seats. The fast section came. Malik's fingers moved rapidly, his body swaying with the rhythm. He wasn't just playing music, he was performing. The music had fire, it had soul. His eyes stayed closed, but you could see every emotion on his face. He was somewhere else completely, inside the music, letting it carry him, and yet, despite the speed and difficulty of the piece, his hands never stumbled. He was completely in control. His grandfather's lessons echoed in his mind. Let the music come from your fingers, but guide it with your heart. In that moment, Malik wasn't just a student. He wasn't a joke. He wasn't someone to be underestimated. He was an artist, musician, a storyteller. The camera phones that had been lifted to catch a funny moment were now recording something entirely different. One girl in the second row, who had laughed when Malik was first called up, now had tears in her eyes. A boy who usually made jokes about Malik sat completely still, his mouth slightly open. The teachers looked at each other in disbelief. Even Mr. Darrington, who had made the sarcastic joke, stood frozen. He didn't look amused anymore. He looked confused, maybe even a little embarrassed. He had expected Malik to be unsure, to struggle with the violin, maybe to quit halfway. Instead, he was watching a performance that no one in that auditorium would ever forget. As the final notes of Chardos rang out, Malik let them fade into the silence. His arms slowly dropped and he opened his eyes. He looked out at the crowd, not with anger, not with pride, but with quiet strength. He had said everything he needed to say, not with words, but with music. There was a beat of complete silence. Then, one person clapped, then another, and then the room exploded in applause. It was loud and sudden, like thunder. People stood up, clapping hard, cheering, some even shouting his name. A few students looked stunned, unsure how to react. But most stood, giving him a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Malik just stood there, still holding the violin. His heart pounding, not with fear, but with something stronger. Something like freedom. Ms. Harris, the music teacher, looked like she had tears in her eyes. She clapped slowly, watching Malik with deep respect. Another teacher leaned over too. Hearn whispered, "Did you know he could play like that?" She shook her head. Not a clue. Mr. Darrington finally stepped forward with the microphone, his voice a little shaky. "Well, That was incredible. Malik, everyone, let's give him one more round of applause. Right. But the crowd didn't need prompting. They were still clapping, louder than ever. Malik stepped off the stage. As he walked back to his seat, people moved out of the way, some patting him on the back, others whispering, "That was amazing," or "Where did you learn?" That he didn't say much. It's just a small nod, a polite thank you. He didn't want to make a big show. He wasn't playing to impress anyone. He had played for something deeper, for truth, for himself, for all the times no one believed in him. When he sat down, the boy next to him leaned over and said, "Dude, you're like a genius or something." Malik smiled a little. "Or something," he replied. The rest of the assembly went on, but nothing else mattered after that. The next students were called to the stage, but even they seemed to know that whatever they did, it wouldn't match what had just happened. By the time the assembly ended and students filed out of the auditorium, Malik had become someone new, in their eyes. Whispers followed him down the hall, not mocking ones, but curious, admiring ones. People looked at him differently now, not with pity or judgment, but with respect. For the first time in a long time, Malik felt seen, but he also knew this was just the beginning. One performance had changed everything, and soon the world outside those school walls would hear his music too. Malik walked out of the school auditorium that day, feeling lighter, but his mind was full. What had just happened on that stage was still sinking in. The feeling of holding that violin, of pulling the bow and letting the music pour out of his soul, was something he had done many times before, but never like this. Never in front of so many eyes. Never while being doubted. Never after being laughed at. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, when Mr. Darrington handed him the violin. With a sarcastic smile, expecting him to fumble, when the crowd was waiting for him to embarrass himself. And then the silence, the stunned silence after his first note. He had turned their mockery into awe. That silence had said everything. The look on the faces of the teachers, the gasps, the round of applause that had thundered through the auditorium like a storm, but now, back in the hallway with students passing by and whispering, Malik wasn't sure how to feel. Some smiled at him. A few nodded, like they were proud. Others avoided eye contact. One boy bumped shoulders with him and muttered, "Didn't know you were like that, bro." Malik didn't know what like that even meant, but he didn't respond. He kept walking. By the time he got to his locker, his phone had buzzed 5 times. He looked at the screen. 3 messages from his friend Kendra, 1 from his mom, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize. Kendra's first message said, "Dude, you legend." The next one was just a bunch of violin emojis and fire. The last one read, "Everyone's talking about it. You broke the school." His mom's message was simple. "Mr. Darrington just called me. Said you played the violin at school today. I'm confused but proud. We'll talk tonight." But it was the unknown number that made him pause. The message said, "Hi, Malik. This is Miss Harris. Please come by the music room after school. We need to talk." He stared at the screen for a moment. Ms. Harris, the school's music teacher. He had never even spoken to her directly. She had always seemed distant, maybe because Malik never joined the music program. But now she wanted to talk. A knot formed in his stomach, not fear exactly, but something like nervous curiosity. He made it through the rest of the day in a strange haze. In each class, people looked at him differently. Some whispered when he walked in. One girl asked if he gave private lessons, even a teacher. Mr. Brenner, who usually acted like Malik didn't exist, smiled and said, "Nice performance today." "Young man?" Malik just nodded. He didn't know how to take the attention. All he'd done was play music, his music, the one part of him he'd always kept private. Now it was out in the open. When the last bell rang, he walked to the music room slowly, his hands in his pockets, his mind spinning. He wasn't sure what Ms. Harris wanted to say. Was she angry? Was she going to ask why he never joined orchestra? Was this going to turn into some lecture? But when he opened the door to the music room, he was surprised. Ms. Harris was sitting at the piano, her back to the door. She was playing something soft, a simple tune. When she heard him enter, she turned around with a smile. "Malik," she said. Come in. Sit down. He walked in slowly and sat in the chair across from her. I've been teaching music for 20 years, she said. And in 20 years, I have never seen a performance like the one you gave today. Just because you played a difficult piece, but because you played it with soul, with feeling, like it meant something. Malik lowered his eyes and said quietly, "It does mean something." She nodded. I could tell that piece, Chartis. It's not something someone learns overnight. Malik finally met her eyes. Grandfather taught me. He used to be a jazz violinist. Then he taught you well, she said. Why didn't you ever join my class? Why keep it hidden? He paused. He had never said this out loud to anyone outside his family, because no one ever expected anything from me. When they did expect something, it wasn't this. Was trouble or silence? I didn't think people here would understand or care. Ms. Harris sighed. I'm sorry about that. You're right. This school doesn't always make space for people who don't fit the usual boxes. But what you did today, you opened that space yourself. You forced people to see you, to hear you. She stood and walked to the small cabinet behind her. She unlocked it and pulled out a black violin case. She brought it to Malik and placed it in front of him. This was my father's, she said. It's been sitting in that cabinet for years. I think it belongs in the hands of someone who will actually use it. Malik stared at the case. I can't take that. That's too much. I'm not giving it to you for free, she smiled. I'm offering it to you on one condition. You join the school orchestra. We have a concert in 2 months. I want you to be part of it. He hesitated. The idea of standing on stage again with others this time, playing something as a team, it scared him a little. But he also knew he couldn't go back to hiding, not after what had happened. Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. The smile on Ms. Harris's face widened. Good. Rehearsals start next week. But if you ever want to practice on your own, the music room is open for you. Always. He nodded and gently opened the violin case. Inside was a beautiful dark wood violin with smooth strings and polished tuning pegs. It felt like it had been waiting for him. Over the next few weeks, Malik became a regular in the music room. During lunch breaks, after school, even before classes, he would be there practicing. Not just for the orchestra, but for himself. Slowly, some of the other orchestra members got to know him. A girl named Sophie, who played cello, started sitting next to him. A boy named Ian, who played viola, asked him questions about his favorite composers. It wasn't easy at first. Some students still looked at him with suspicion, like they couldn't believe someone like him could be serious about music. But others were welcoming. Malik found himself smiling more, opening up a little. He still didn't talk much, but when he played, he didn't need to. One afternoon, Ms. Harris came in holding a flyer. She handed it to Malik and said, There's a citywide student music competition next month. Solo category. The winner gets a scholarship to the state music camp. He read the flyer carefully. His heart began to pound again. A solo performance? In front of professional judges? You should enter, she said. You have more than enough talent. But what if I mess up? He asked. She looked at him and said, Then you learn. But if you don't try, you'll never know. That night, Malik sat on his bed with the flyer in his hand. He thought about all the times he had doubted himself, all the times he had let fear keep him quiet. But he also thought about the assembly, the silence, the applause, the way the violin had felt in his hands. He picked up his grandfather's old violin and began to play, a slow, soft tune. His fingers moved smoothly, confidently. He wasn't afraid anymore, not of being seen, not of being different. The next day, he filled out the entry form. Word spread quickly around the school. Malik's going to perform again, people whispered, this time at a real competition. Some students still didn't get it. A few joked behind his back, but many others were genuinely curious, even excited. Some of his teachers began to check in, asking him how rehearsals were going, as the day of the competition came. Closer, Malik practiced harder than ever. He worked with Ms. Harris every afternoon. She helped him choose the perfect peace meditation from the opera tie. slow, emotional piece that demanded both technical skill and deep feeling. It was the kind of music that required you to put your soul into every note. The night before the competition, his mom came into his room. "You nervous?" she asked. He nodded a little. She sat beside him and took his hand. "I know this hasn't been an easy place for you, but what you've done, showing them who you are, that's brave, Malik. I'm proud of you. Your grandfather would be too." He smiled. "Oh. I hope so." The next morning, dressed in a white shirt and black pants, holding the violin Miss Harris had loaned him, Malik stood backstage at the city music hall. The curtains were drawn. The crowd beyond them was quiet, waiting. The other students performing had already gone. It was his turn now. He looked at the stage. It was bigger than the school auditorium, but he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He stepped out, took a deep breath, and lifted his violin. The music began. And once again the world disappeared. Malik stood center stage, holding his violin, eyes gently closed as he let the silence of the hall surround him. This wasn't the school auditorium anymore. This was the city music, hall bright lights, polished wood floors, rows of judges sitting. In the front row with pens in hand and dozens of strangers watching from the seats. For a moment it felt like the world paused. Every noise vanished except the sound of his heartbeat. He took a deep breath and began to play. The first note of meditation from Tai floated into the air like a soft breath on a cold morning. It was gentle and full of emotion. Malik didn't just play the music, he let it come from the quietest corners of his heart. Each note held a story. Each bow stroke carried a piece of his journey from being the quiet boy no one noticed to standing here, center stage, in front of professionals, and strangers who knew nothing about him, yet were about to know everything. The music filled the room with warmth and sorrow and beauty. His fingers moved with grace and memory, shaped by years of hidden practice with his grandfather. Hours spent in that small living room where dreams were quietly born. But this wasn't practice anymore. This was his moment. The judges didn't blink. Their pens froze. Even the people in the back rows leaned forward in their seats. Mother whispered to her daughter, "Listen to that." Malik didn't hear the whispers, but he felt the stillness. He knew that silence now it was the same as the one in the school auditorium, not the silence of boredom. The silence of surprise, of awe, of realization. Halfway through the piece, the music grew stronger, fuller. Malik's body moved with it. His bow swept faster now, rising with the emotion of the piece. His face showed the music's pain, its longing, its healing. He wasn't just playing notes. He was telling a story of being overlooked, doubted, laughed at, then rising beyond all of it. People didn't know that this was more than just a song for him. They didn't know what it felt like to be asked to perform as a joke. They didn't know the weight of carrying talent in silence for so long. But now they could feel it, because he was letting them. As the final note hung in the air, Malik held his bow still, letting the sound gently fade into the echo of the hall. There was complete silence, then dash applause. It started slow, like a spark, and it grew louder and louder. The audience stood. The judges exchanged looks, nodded, and one even smiled wide. Malik slowly opened his eyes and looked out at the crowd. These weren't classmates who felt guilty for laughing. These were strangers, and yet they were giving him the same stunned respect. He bowed, quietly stepped off stage, and walked behind the curtain. Backstage, Ms. Harris was already waiting, her eyes shining. "Malik, you did it. That was beyond incredible. I don't care what the results say, you just gave a master-level performance." He smiled, still catching his breath. "Thanks," he whispered. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now, let's wait. Results will be up soon." The wait felt long. Other performers passed by, some with hopeful smiles, others looking disappointed. Malik sat quietly, holding the violin, thinking about his grandfather. He wished the old man could see him now, see how far he had come. Maybe he could. Maybe somehow he already knew. After about an hour, an event organizer stepped out with a printed list and pinned it to the corkboard. A small crowd of students rushed to check the results. Malik walked slowly. Careful, not wanting to rush and feel crushed, he scanned the list. Solo violin category first place. Malik Johnson meditation from Taish stared at the words. Moving then, slowly, he smiled. Kendra suddenly appeared, screaming, "You won, you won." She grabbed his arm and pulled him into a spinning hug. Ms. Harris joined with a proud laugh. Malik couldn't stop smiling. Felt surreal, like a dream. He never thought he'd be allowed to have, but it was real. The audience saw him. The judges saw him. He had earned it not because he proved someone wrong, but because he proved something true. The prize wasn't just a trophy. It was a full scholarship to the state's top summer music program. Malik would get to train with world-class violinists, play in orchestras, and grow in ways he never thought possible. In the following weeks, everything began to change for him. At school, word had spread quickly. Videos from the city performance had gone viral among the student body. Even teachers who hadn't spoken to him much before were now congratulating him in the halls. During lunch one day, the principal himself approached Malik. "I must admit, Malik, I had no idea about your talent," he said awkwardly. "I hope we can do more to support young artists like you." Malik nodded politely, though a small voice inside him remembered that the principal had laughed the loudest when Malik was first handed that violin. Still, he didn't feel anger, just clarity. Sometimes people don't see you until you force them to look. He continued playing in the school orchestra, where he started mentoring younger students. He helped a shy boy named Jordan learn to hold his bow properly, played duets with Sophie, and coached Ian through a difficult solo. Slowly, the orchestra room became a second home. He also began to compose small things at first, melodies that came to him at night, short pieces inspired by things he'd seen or felt. Ms. Harris encouraged him to keep writing, saying his voice as a composer was just as special as his voice as a performer. At home, his mother finally heard him play a full concert piece for the first time. She sat in their living room and cried quietly as he played, clapping hard when he finished. "You have your grandfather's hands," she whispered, "and his heart." One evening, as Malik sat watching the video of his competition performance, again his mom walked in holding an envelope. "This came today," she said, "from the music conservatory." He opened it, nervous. Inside was a letter of invitation to audition for their Young Artist program, a program known to produce some of the finest musicians in the country. They had seen his video. They wanted him. The tears that came this time weren't from sadness or pain, but joy. Pure, overwhelming joy. He practiced for weeks for the audition, pouring everything into it. When the day came, he walked into the conservatory building, heart racing but steady. He was no longer the boy who had been laughed at for holding a violin. He was no longer invisible. He stood in front of the panel, lifted his bow, and played not because he had to prove himself, but because music was who he was. Because now, finally, the world was listening. Malik stood outside the doors of the conservatory's grand recital hall. His hands were not shaking, but his heart beat loud in his chest. This was the day he had dreamed of ever since the city competition. The day he would play for the audition panel of one of the most prestigious music academies in the state. Everything he had worked for, the practice, the pain, the rejection, the applause, all led to this moment. His mother stood beside him, gently fixing the collar of his shirt. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. Pride, love, belief. Malik looked at her and said softly, "I'll be okay." She nodded and smiled. "You already are." When the door opened and a staff member called his name, Malik stepped forward. His violin case felt heavier than usual, like it carried not just wood and strings, but every memory, every tear, every note he had ever played. As he entered the hall, he saw 5 judges sitting behind a long table. They didn't smile, didn't speak, just waited for him to begin. He took his place at the center of the room. The lights weren't bright like at a concert. It was quiet, serious, almost cold. But Malik had felt colder silences before, like the one in that school assembly, before he played for the first time. He had faced worse. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Then he lifted his violin and began to play. The piece he chose was one of the most emotional and difficult compositions he had ever learned, Niggin by Ernest Bloch. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it was deep, spiritual, and full of expression. The kind of music that asked the musician to feel every note, not just play it. As he drew the bow across the strings, Malik lost himself in the music. The world outside faded. Again, his nerves dissolved into purpose. Each note rang clear and full of emotion. He played not just with skill, but with his story. The way he had been doubted. The way people once looked at him and saw nothing but a stereotype. The way he had held all of it in until he had no choice but to speak through the strings of his violin. The judges leaned in. One took notes. Another lowered his pen and just listened. Malik didn't watch them. He didn't care what they wrote. This wasn't just for them. This was for him when he reached the end. He let the final note linger. Then he lowered the violin slowly and stepped back. The judges didn't say much, just "Thank you, Malik." That was all. He nodded and walked out quietly. The door closed. Behind him, his mother stood up, searching his face. He smiled a little and whispered, "I did my best." "That's all you ever need to do," she said. They went home that evening with no answers. The results would come in the mail in a few days. But Malik didn't feel nervous. For the first time, he felt peace. He had faced one of the biggest moments of his life and given everything. He had nothing to regret. 2 weeks later, a large envelope arrived. Malik opened it slowly, sitting at the kitchen table while his mom stood beside him, holding her breath. The letter inside read, "Congratulations, Malik Johnson. You have been accepted into the Young Artist Program at the State Conservatory. We are honored to welcome you into our community of musicians." He read it again and again. Couldn't believe it. His mother let out a breath she had been holding and hugged him tightly. "You did it," she said. "You really did it." That summer changed everything. The conservatory was unlike anything Malik had experienced. Every day started early with warm-ups and technique classes, studied under teachers who had performed around the world. His classmates were talented musicians from all backgrounds. Some came from rich families with private tutors. Some, like him, had learned music in living rooms from parents or grandparents. At first, Malik felt out of place. Some students had years of formal training. Some spoke in fancy music terms he didn't understand. But when they all picked up their instruments and played together, none of that mattered. His sound spoke for him. He quickly earned the respect of the other students, not just for his playing, but for his humility. He was quiet, but focused. Helpful, but never boastful. Slowly, people started coming to him for help with tricky passages. They asked him where he trained, and he told them. "Honestly, in my grandfather's apartment." The program pushed him harder than ever. Long hours of practice, theory exams, chamber music sessions, solo rehearsals. At times, he felt exhausted. But every night, when he lay in bed and looked at the violin case beside him, he remembered how far he had come. Halfway through the summer, the conservatory held a midterm recital. Each student had to perform a solo piece. Malik chose something new, his own composition. A short piece he had written late at night during his first week at the program. It was raw, full of the emotions he felt being there: fear, wonder, hope. When he played it, something shifted in the audience. The room went quiet, just like it had during his first performance at school. Teachers exchanged glances. Students leaned forward. One of the instructors closed his eyes and smiled. After the recital, program director approached Malik. "Did you write that piece yourself?" she asked. He nodded. "Then you're not just a violinist," she said. "You're a composer. Don't ever stop creating." That sentence stayed with him. By the end of the summer, Malik had not only grown as a musician, but as a person. He walked taller, spoke more. He had made friends with people from all over the state, some who would become lifelong collaborators. He learned to listen better, to express more, to believe in himself. When he returned home, his school welcomed him with open arms. His orchestra teacher, Ms. Harris, had decorated the music room with photos of his conservatory performances. Students clapped for him in the hallway. Even the principal gave him a certificate of recognition at an assembly. But Malik never let it go to his head. he returned to helping younger students. He started a small after-school music group where anyone could come learn even if they didn't have an instrument. He borrowed violins from local shops, used school space to teach, and then something even bigger happened. A video of his city performance from months ago had reached a wider audience. A music magazine had picked it up and written an article, "The Boy Who Played Through Their Doubt." Suddenly, Malik started getting messages from young musicians across the country. Some said, "I never thought someone like me could play classical music, but you changed that." Others asked for lessons or tips. Some just said, "Thank you, Malik," read every message. One day, he got an email from a large national arts foundation. They wanted to sponsor his travel to attend an international youth music festival in Europe the next year. He showed the email to his mom, not believing his eyes. "You're going to need a passport?" She laughed, tears in her eyes again. From that point, everything moved quickly. Interviews, performances, mentorship offers. Even music schools began reaching out early, saying they hoped he would apply when the time came. But Malik stayed grounded. He still walked the same streets, still visited the small park where he used to play violin alone, still practiced in the same corner of his house, the one his grandfather used to sit in. He never forgot the beginning, the assembly, the laughter, the joke, the challenge, and how he had turned it all around with one violin, one performance, one moment of courage. Years later, Malik stood backstage again, this time at a major concert hall. He was now 22, preparing for his debut solo performance with a national orchestra. The audience outside included musicians, critics, and music lovers from all over the world. He held the same violin, the one Ms. Harris had once loaned him, now officially his. As he waited for his cue, a reporter came up and asked, "You've had quite a journey. From being handed a violin as a joke to playing in front of the world, what does that feel like?" Malik smiled. "It feels like I never needed to prove anything to them," he said. "I just needed to remind myself of who I was." Then the curtain rose, and Malik stepped into the light again.